Hey, it's me. I've got something a little different, but very on brand for us tonight. You've seen the stories, right? People who hit their head and suddenly play piano, or wake up from surgery and speak with an accent. Every so often, though, you get something that doesn't really fit any medical box. People waking up knowing languages they never learned, or being able to read a script they've never seen before, just for a day, and then it's gone. Now, I'm not saying we're in a simulation where someone forgot to lock the language pack, but after going through these submissions, it's hard not to feel like sometimes reality pulls a file from the wrong folder. We're going to start with a couple of language glitches, then branch out into more classic glitch in the Matrix territory. Time slips, vanishing objects, places that don't behave like places should. As always, these are told in the first person, by people who swear they're sober, sane, and just as confused as you and me. So, settle in. Maybe turn the lights down just a bit, and listen closely. Because if reality is going to break, it might start with something as simple as a word you shouldn't understand. Story 1. Woke Up, Speaking Italian, by Youthro, a linguist. I need to give some context before I get into this, because otherwise it's going to sound like I'm just making it up. This happened in January 2018, my junior year at UW-Madison. I'm a biology major, not a language person. In high school, I took 2 years of Spanish, because I had to, scraped by with B's, and promptly forgot most of it. I've never studied Italian, never been to Italy. Nobody in my family speaks it. I'm a rational person. I don't believe in past lives or anything like that. It was a Wednesday, first week back after winter break. It was one of those gray Wisconsin days where it feels like the sun never really comes up. I had an 8:50 a.m. lab, then a huge gap until a 3 p.m. lecture. Around noon, I went back to my dorm to take what was supposed to be a 30-minute nap. I remember checking my phone. 12:17 p.m. I set an alarm for 12:50, lay down in my lofted bed, and closed my eyes. The room was warm from the radiator, and I could hear the muffled sounds of people in the hallway, doors slamming, someone laughing. Totally normal. I don't remember dreaming anything. I just remember the alarm going off, and that groggy, heavy feeling. I sat up, reached for my phone, and saw a text from my roommate, who was in class. "Hey, can you move my laundry to the dryer at 1 if I'm not back?" "Thanks," I muttered. "Sì, va bene," out loud, and then froze. I don't know how to explain the feeling. It was like my brain had taken a step before I knew there were stairs. The phrase felt automatic, natural. I knew what I had just said. Yes, okay. But I also knew I had never, ever said those words in my life. Just to be clear, I was completely sober. I hadn't even had coffee yet. I don't do drugs. I hadn't hit my head. I sat there in my lofted bed, heart starting to race, and said it again. "Sì, va bene." The pronunciation felt easy, like my mouth already knew where to go. I tested another word that popped into my head. Finestre. Windows. Why did I know that? I looked at the single, narrow dorm window by my desk, and my brain just labeled it. At that point, I honestly thought I was still dreaming. I climbed down, feet hitting the cold tile, and grabbed my laptop. I went to Google Translate and typed window in English. Italian, finestra, plural finestre. Close enough that I felt this weird drop in my stomach. I decided to really test it. I typed, "I am going to move your laundry," and switched it to Italian. It gave me, "Vado a spostare il tuo bucato." I read it once, and without really thinking, I said it out loud. Not sounding it out syllable by syllable, but just reading it. It felt like reading English. I understood it in this direct way, not as, "Oh yeah, I recognize those letters." Now I'm fully freaking out. I text my friend Marco, who's an actual Italian exchange student I only knew, because we were in the same biology discussion group the semester before. I still had his number from a group project. I sent, "Random question, can you call me?" He calls like 30 seconds later. I answer, and instead of, "Hello," what comes out of my mouth is, "Ciao, scusa se ti disturbo, ma ho bisogno di chiederti una cosa strana." I heard myself say it, perfectly fast, with an accent that at least sounded close to his. It basically means, "Hi, sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you something weird." Marco starts laughing and goes, "Oh, parli italiano adesso? You speak Italian now?" We talk for maybe 5 minutes, entirely in Italian. Me, the guy who could barely order a taco in Spanish. I asked him how his break was, told him the dining hall food still sucked, asked if he was going to the lab review tomorrow. I understood his answers. I wasn't translating in my head. It felt like someone had installed a new language pack overnight. At one point, I even asked him, again in Italian, "Is my accent okay?" And he said, "It's actually really good. You sound like someone from the north who's lived in the US a long time." When we hung up, my hands were shaking so hard I had to put the phone down. I triple-checked everything I could think of. I opened random Italian news articles and timed myself reading them out loud. I could go through sentences I had never seen before and understand them. Not every word, but like a solid 80%. I messaged a girl from my dorm who was doing an Italian minor and asked if I could read something to her, for fun. She confirmed I sounded basically fluent, but a bit rusty. This went on for about 6 hours. I went to my 3 p.m. lecture, and while the professor was talking, I kept pulling up Italian Wikipedia pages on my laptop and reading them like it was nothing. I wrote down phrases in my notebook. I tested myself by closing my eyes and trying to remember the exact spelling. It all stuck. By around 6 p.m., something started to shift. I was in the dining hall, listening to an Italian podcast I had just found, and it was like the audio slowly turned to static. 10 minutes before, I could follow the host's story about traffic in Rome. Now it was just a blur of fast syllables. By 8 p.m., when Marco texted me, "Che cosa è successo oggi? Sei un mago? What happened today? Are you a wizard?" I had to copy-paste it into Google Translate. I could pick out a couple of words, but that direct understanding was gone. It was like waking up and only remembering scraps of a dream. The next day, it was worse. I remembered some words like ciao and grazie and finestra, but the grammar felt foreign again. I tried to recreate what I'd done with news articles and couldn't. It was back to being a normal language I hadn't learned. I've gone over this 1,000 times. I wasn't sick. I wasn't on medication. There's no head injury in my history. Nobody spiked my drink. The only evidence I have is a screenshot of my call log with Marco and a few lines of Italian I scribbled in my bio notebook that afternoon. Marco still jokes about it sometimes. "Remember when you randomly became Italian for a day?" he'll say. I laugh, but there's this cold feeling in my chest every time, because I know how this sounds, but for 6 hours of my life, I had access to a language I never learned, and then the universe took it back. I don't know what to call this. Has anyone else had something like this happen to them? All right, so check this out. That one sets the tone pretty well. Language just dropping in like a software update and then uninstalling itself a few hours later. Let's shift gears for a second. This next one is shorter, more of a classic. I triple-checked and it still makes no sense. Object glitch. No mysterious words this time. Just a set of keys that apparently think they're NPCs with a fast travel option. Story 2. The triple-checked keys by U Southside Tech. This happened last summer in Chicago, and every time I tell it, people try to find the gotcha in it. I've done the same thing in my own head, and it still doesn't add up. For context, I'm a 32-year-old IT guy. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in ghosts. I'm the one everyone calls when their router stops working. I'm a rational person. I like things I can explain. It was a Wednesday in August, hot and humid, that sticky Midwest heat. I work at a mid-sized insurance office in the South Loop, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I drive a beat-up 2010 Corolla and park in the same parking garage across the street every day, 4th floor near the stairwell. That morning, I remember locking my car with my key fob and hearing the beep echo in the concrete. I clipped my keys to my belt loop, like I always do with a little carabiner. It's a habit. I hate the feeling of keys in my pockets. I get up to the office, sit down, do my usual morning stuff. Around 10:30 a.m., my co-worker Jess pokes her head over the cube wall and asks if I can look at her laptop in the conference room, because it won't connect to the Wi-Fi. No problem. We go in. I kneel down to unplug and replug the docking cables. When I stand up, I feel this lightness at my hip. I reach down. No keys. First reaction. They just came unclipped. I check the floor under the conference table. Nothing. I pat down my pockets even though I know I didn't put them there. Empty. Jess helps me look. Under chairs, on the ledge by the window, on the conference room table, even the trash can. No keys. I retrace my steps. Cubicle? Not there. Kitchen counter where I poured my coffee? Not there. Bathroom? I even checked the stalls. Nothing. Over the next half hour, I basically tear my workspace apart. Backpack, drawers, under my desk, inside my desk. I asked 3 different people to look with fresh eyes. By 11:15, I've accepted that I somehow lost them between the garage and the office. Which is weird, because I remember the feeling of them hanging from my belt when I walked across the street. But whatever, maybe they fell off in the stairwell. So I go down the elevator, cross to the garage, and walk the route I took. Sidewalk, crosswalk, up the stairs, 4th floor, my usual spot. I'm scanning the ground, the corners, even the railing. No keys. I get to my car, and that's when I notice something that makes my stomach drop. My car is locked. The little lock nub on the inside of the driver's door is down. I pull the handle. Definitely locked. For a second, I feel actually dizzy. If I dropped my keys on the way in, the car shouldn't be locked. If my keys are in the car, how did I lock it? My Corolla is old school. You can't lock it from the outside without either the key fob or sticking the key in the door. From the inside, you'd have to push the lock and close the door. But then the keys would also be inside. I peer in through the driver's window, hands cupped to block the glare. The interior is a sauna, sunlight bouncing off the grey seats. Center console, cup holders, seats, floor, no keys. At this point, I'm annoyed more than anything. I walk down to the parking garage office and ask the attendant if anyone has turned in a set of keys. He checks the little lost and found box. Nothing. I ask if I can review the security footage from the stairwell and the area near my car, just in case they dropped and someone picked them up. He actually lets me, which surprised me. We scrub through from 7:45 to 8:15. There I am, walking in, keys visibly hanging from my right hip, little silver flash when I move. I go up the stairs, out of frame. Nobody else uses that stairwell in that window. Nobody bends down to pick anything up. I go back to work, kind of resigned that I'm calling a locksmith after my shift. Fast forward to 4:05 p.m. I'm the last one out of my section. I walk back to the garage feeling weirdly self-conscious, like the universe is watching. I get to my car, and I just stop. My keys are sitting on the hood of my Corolla, not near the wipers where they could have been tucked and missed, not half hanging off the edge. They are dead center on the slightly dusty silver hood, my black key fob, and 3 metal keys, exactly how they look when they're hanging from my belt. My first thought was, Jess is messing with me. She must have somehow grabbed my keys earlier, driven to the garage, and put them there as a prank. Except she doesn't have a car. She Ubers to work. And also, that doesn't explain how the car was already locked at 11 a.m. I wasn't under the influence of anything. I touched the hood. Hot. If the keys had been there all day, someone would have noticed them. There's constant foot traffic in that garage. And it's a city. Unattended stuff gets taken. I stand there staring at them, heart pounding, and I swear, I had this intense feeling that if I looked up, I'd see someone on an upper level watching me. I did look. No one. I tested the fob. It unlocked the car. Same keys, same scuff mark on the house key from where it scraped the lock a few winters ago. To this day, I can't explain it. There's no logical explanation that covers every part of this. How they vanished from my belt in a locked office, how my car was locked with no keys inside, and how they reappeared hours later, on top of the car, like they'd been carefully placed there. What do you think happened? Speaking of things showing up where they absolutely should not be, let's swing back toward our unofficial theme for the night. Languages that weren't there yesterday. This next one comes from someone working right on the border of 2 cultures and 2 languages. You'd think the brain might just be picking things up through osmosis, right? Maybe. But the way this one kicks in and then drains away again feels off. Story 3. The French that only existed for an hour, by you, Border Town Barista. It was May 2019. I'll never forget the date because it was the week before our cafe changed owners, and everything was chaos. I live in a small town in northern Vermont, like 20 minutes from the Quebec border. Growing up here, you hear French all the time. Tourists, road signs, radio stations, if the wind is right. But I never actually learned it. My high school offered Spanish, so that's what I took. I can say hola and donde está el baño, and that's about it. I'm not crazy. I wasn't drunk or high. At the time this happened, I was 24, working as a barista in this little independent coffee shop on Main Street, doing the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. It was a Wednesday. Quiet, gray morning, drizzle outside. The kind of morning where the whole town feels sleepy. I opened the shop at 6, did the usual, turned on the lights, got the espresso machine warming up, baked off some croissants. By 7:30, we had the usual slow trickle of regulars. Around 8:15 a.m., a group of 4 older women came in. I recognized the vibe immediately. Quebec plates on their car, pastel windbreakers, that specific kind of floral perfume. They were chattering to each other in French as they came to the counter. Normally, this is where I smile, say hi. And then we go into that awkward dance of them trying broken English and me saying, Désolé, je ne parle pas français, in a terrible accent. But as they reached the counter, and one of them turned to me, mouth opening, something really strange happened. It was like a switch flipped in my head. I suddenly knew exactly what she was going to say. Not word for word, but the meaning. Good morning, dear. What do you recommend? And then I just answered. In French. Bonjour, mesdames. Le café du jour est un mélange colombien. Sinon, je peux vous faire un cappuccino ou un latte. Vous préférez quelque chose de fort ou plus doux? I can type that now because I wrote it down later, but in the moment it came out smooth, with rhythm. It basically means, "Good morning, ladies." The coffee of the day is a Colombian blend. Otherwise, I can make you a cappuccino or a latte. Do you prefer something strong or milder? The four of them lit up. One actually put her hand over her heart and said, "Oh, c'est merveilleux. Tu parles français." We went through the whole ordering process in French. I asked if they wanted their pastries warmed up. I told them to listen for their names. I even cracked a dumb little joke about how the weather couldn't make up its mind. There was no translation happening in my head. It felt like when you're really tired and you slip into autopilot on your commute, and suddenly you're at work. The sentences just built themselves. Here's where it gets weirder. Our regular Tom was sitting at the corner table near the register. Mid-50s, local mechanic, comes in every morning for black coffee and a blueberry muffin. He knows maybe 2 words of French. He was sitting there the whole time, watching this interaction. After the ladies sat down, Tom comes up to the counter with his empty cup and just stares at me. "I didn't know you spoke French," he says, and I answer, without thinking, "Je ne parle pas vraiment. Je me débrouille un peu seulement." I don't really speak it, I just get by a little. I hear the words, and suddenly it's like this wave of vertigo hits me. I grab the edge of the counter. The cafe lights seem too bright. For a second, I'm actually worried I'm having a stroke. Tom must have seen my face because he said, "Hey, you okay?" This time, when I opened my mouth, English came out. Yeah, I'm fine. Just dizzy." He looks at me funny and says, "Since when do you talk like the lady on the Radio Canada station?" I tell him I have no idea. For the next maybe 45 minutes, I could still do it. More Quebecers came in, like they always do on Wednesdays, and with every one of them I slipped into French without thinking. The words were there, like furniture in a room I suddenly remembered. I understood them when they spoke fast. I could explain that our muffin flavors changed every day, that our card reader was acting up, that we were out of oat milk. Around 9:30, it was like someone slowly turned the volume down on a radio. A guy came in and asked in French if we had decaf. I understood him, but the answer got stuck on the way out. I stumbled. Oui, nous avons café sans caffeine? I was suddenly back to sounding like a tourist clutching a phrasebook. By 10 a.m., it was gone. Totally gone. I tried to say something simple to myself in the back room. "I like coffee," and came up blank. The grammar felt slippery. Words I'd used casually half an hour earlier were just missing. Here's the part that keeps me up at night. Around noon, when it was slow, I decided to test myself. I took out a receipt roll and wrote down every French word or phrase I could remember from that morning. I filled maybe half a foot of paper. Then, on my break, I took a picture of it and texted it to my cousin, who's fluent and teaches French at the community college. I sent, "Random question. Does any of this make sense, or did I just butcher your language?" She texted back almost immediately, "Dude, did you copy this from somewhere? This is totally normal French. The grammar is fine, a few weird word choices, but this is easily B2 level. Since when do you know this much?" I called her and told her exactly what I'm telling you, that it felt like, for about an hour, I had direct access to a language I never studied. I mean, yes, I've heard French all my life in the background, but I never sat down and learned conjugations. I couldn't have passed a basic test the day before. We tried to test it on the phone. She asked me questions in French. I could catch maybe 1 word in 5. I couldn't answer without stumbling. The connection was gone. I've gone over this 1,000 times. Maybe my brain just, I don't know, stitched together a lifetime of overheard phrases in this one weird burst. But if that's the case, why did it vanish so completely instead of gradually getting better? Tom still brings it up sometimes. Remember that morning you were all bonjour and merci all over the place? He grins, but then he always adds, I saw you. You weren't faking. To this day, I can't explain it. Has anyone else woken up one day with a language in their mouth that wasn't there the night before? I've been sitting on that one for a while. There's something especially unsettling about skills that appear and disappear like that. It's not like misplacing your keys. You can blame that on being distracted. But waking up fluent and going to bed basic again? Where does that go? Let's keep going. This next story steps away from languages and into more classic glitch in the Matrix territory. It's got that investigation vibe I know a lot of you like. Someone who actually tries to test the weirdness instead of just freaking out and leaving. We're heading out of the cafe and into a place that, honestly, sounds like it didn't finish loading. Story 4. The Neighborhood That Wasn't Finished Loading by Yu Pacific Walker. I've never told anyone this before because it sounds like I just got lost or had a migraine or something. But I'm a completely sober person. I've never had hallucinations. And I've lived in the same city my whole life. I know what my neighborhood looks like. This happened in October 2021 in Tacoma, Washington. It was that time of year where it's chilly in the mornings, but not really cold yet. The leaves were mostly yellow and orange, piling up along the curbs. I'd just started working remotely and had gotten into the habit of taking long walks in the afternoon to keep from going stir-crazy. My usual route was a loop, out of my apartment building, down our street, around a few residential blocks, then back along a slightly busier road with a couple of small businesses. The full loop took about 40 minutes at a normal pace. I'd done it at least 3 times a week for a month. On this particular Tuesday, I headed out around 3:30 p.m. The sky was that pale blue, washed-out color we get a lot here, with thin, high clouds. I had a podcast on, some tech thing about AI, ironically, and my noise-canceling earbuds in transparency mode, so I could still hear cars and stuff. Everything was normal until I turned onto Maple, which is this quiet residential street with older craftsman houses. I was maybe 15 minutes into my walk. As I turned the corner, I noticed it was quiet, like really quiet. Normally, you at least hear a lawnmower, a dog, kids, something. There were no sounds except my footsteps on the sidewalk and the faint hiss of my podcast. The second thing I noticed was the air. It felt slightly thicker, like right before it rains, but the sky hadn't changed. No wind, no temperature drop, just this subtle, almost pressure in my ears. I paused the podcast and pulled one earbud out. The silence was almost physical. I could hear my own breathing loud in my head and the distant whoosh of the main road behind me, but Maple itself seemed muted. I kept walking, telling myself it was just one of those weird lulls. About halfway down the block, there's usually this big maple tree, ironically, whose roots have pushed up the sidewalk, so you have to step over a crack. I pass it every time and always glance at the house with the blue door across from it. This time, there was no tree. There was no crack. The sidewalk was perfectly smooth, like it had just been poured last week. And the house across from it didn't have a blue door. It didn't have a door at all. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. The house was there, sort of. The basic shape, a single-story rectangle with a peaked roof, 2 front windows. But the details were wrong or missing. The siding, which should have been worn grey wood, looked like flat, uniform beige, no texture. The windows were there, but it was like someone had tinted them too dark in Photoshop. The front steps existed, but where the door should have been was just a slightly darker beige rectangle. No knob, no frame, no welcome mat. Just the suggestion of a door. I actually stopped walking and stared. My heart sped up. I'm a rational person. I immediately thought, okay, they renovated. They took down the tree, redid the sidewalk, changed the door. Maybe they covered it while they paint. So I looked around, trying to see other signs of construction. Dumpsters, a truck, ladders, anything. There was nothing. And this is when I realized it wasn't just that house. Every house on the block looked simplified, like someone had started rendering them and then walked away halfway through. Lawns were flat green with no variation, no bald spots or dandelions. Cars in driveways looked slightly too clean, like dealership photos. Bushes were rounded blobs of darker green with no individual leaves. I walked a few more steps on autopilot, skin prickling. On my left, I passed where Mr. Patel usually has this riot of potted plants on his porch. Fuchsias, geraniums, the works. They weren't there. The porch itself was just a flat grey slab. No chairs, no pots, no wind chime. The front window was a glossy dark rectangle. At this point, I did something I'm weirdly proud of. I decided to test it instead of just running home. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. If this was some kind of visual migraine or my brain misfiring, maybe the camera would show the real scene. I pointed it at the beige no-door house and snapped a photo. On the screen, the house looked normal. White trim, blue door, the old wooden siding, the big maple tree with the cracked sidewalk in front. My breath caught. I lowered the phone. In real life, still beige, still no tree. I lifted the phone again and switched to video, recording as I slowly panned across the street. Through the screen, I saw the neighborhood I recognized. Mr. Patel's porch full of flowers, the familiar cars, the chipped paint on the yellow house. When I lowered it, I was back in the smoothed-out, half-rendered version. I tested it twice more just to be sure. Same result. I even held the phone up so I could see the real version on the screen, while simultaneously seeing the weird version in my peripheral vision. My heart was racing so hard. At that point, I could feel it in my throat. I was completely sober. I put my earbud back in and out again, like maybe sound would snap things back. It didn't. I decided to keep walking the loop, partly because I wanted to see where this effect ended, and partly because I had that animal sense that if I turned around and ran, something worse might happen. By the time I reached the end of Maple and turned onto the busier road, everything snapped back to normal. Not gradually, one blink, and suddenly there was traffic noise at a normal volume. The air felt light again, and the houses on the corner looked exactly like I remembered them. I turned back to look at Maple, and it looked fine. Trees, texture, kids' bikes in a yard. My phone photos matched what my eyes were seeing again. I finished the loop in a kind of daze, went home, and immediately checked the photos and video I'd taken. They all showed normal Maple. Blue door, cracked sidewalk, Mr. Patel's jungle porch. The metadata said they were taken at 3:47 p.m. The next day, I walked the same route at the same time, heart pounding as I turned onto Maple. Everything was normal. The tree was there. I even ran my hand along the rough bark to make sure it was physical. The blue door had its little wreath. The porch plants were back. I did the loop for the rest of the week. Nothing weird. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to knock on the blue door house. A woman in her 60s answered. I made up a story about doing a photography project of the neighborhood over time and asked how long they'd lived there. 23 years, she said. We haven't really changed much. The big renovation was in 2005. I asked if they'd ever had the front door replaced or taken out the tree. She looked at me like I was a bit slow. No, hun, we love that tree. Why? I've gone over every rational explanation, seizure activity. But I've never had any other symptoms. Visual migraine. But those usually come with color auras and blind spots, not an entire block looking like a low-res video game. And that doesn't explain the camera showing something different from my eyes. To this day, I still have the photos and the short, shaky video on my phone. I look at them sometimes to reassure myself that, at least technically, the world did make sense. But then I remember what I saw with my own eyes, and that tight, pressurized air, and I get that same crawling feeling on the back of my neck. I don't know what to call this. A rendering error, a reality hiccup. Has anyone else ever had a street look like it wasn't finished? All right, that's the first batch. We've had languages that appear and vanish, keys that ignore physics, and a neighborhood that looks like it's waiting for someone to turn the texture settings back on. In the next part, we're going to stay on this language thread but twist it a bit. People understanding things they absolutely should not be able to, in places that definitely aren't behaving normally either. Hey, it's me. Before we dive back in, quick thing. If you have a glitch story you want to share, send it to the email in the description. It's got to be true, written as clearly as you can, and let me know how you want to be credited. Username, first name, anonymous, whatever makes you comfortable. I read every single one that comes in, and some of the wildest stories I've used on here started as a late-night email from somebody who thought, no one is ever going to believe this, but... So if you're sitting on something that's been bothering you for years, a time slip, an object that moved on its own, a place that wasn't quite right, or yeah, maybe that one afternoon, you mysteriously spoke fluent Norwegian, send it over. All right, let's get back to the glitches. Story 5. The Day I Could Read. Cyrillic by you, Second Floor Stacks. Has anybody else had this happen to them? You look at something that should be total gibberish, and suddenly it isn't. This was March 2022 at a university library in Ohio. I'm a 26-year-old grad student in sociology. I'm a rational person, very much in the, if I can't cite it, I don't trust it camp. For languages, I did the bare minimum. 2 semesters of German in undergrad because it fit my schedule. I can order a beer and say where the bathroom is. That's about it. No Slavic languages. Nobody in my family is Russian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian, any of that. I don't play games with Cyrillic menus. It's just not part of my life. On this particular Thursday, I was doing my assistantship shift at the campus library, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. My job that day was dead simple. Reshelve returns. Check that call numbers are in order, that kind of thing. It was quiet, sunny through those big tall windows, dust doing that lazy float in the beams of light. Around 11:30, I was on the second floor in the history section. I remember because my cart had this stack of thick books about the Cold War. The shelves here are tall, old metal ones, the kind that make little echoes when you roll the cart. I was sliding a book into place when another one caught my eye. It was sticking out just a bit, in the wrong order. Dark red hardcover, no dust jacket, gold lettering on the spine. In Cyrillic. This isn't unusual. We've got foreign language sections. The weird part was that my brain didn't mark it as weird alphabet. It just read it. I looked at the spine and saw, as clearly as if it were in English. Historia Sovetskogo Soyuza, 1945, 1991. History of the Soviet Union. There was this half-second delay where I thought, oh, they must have put a transliteration sticker on it. But there wasn't one, just the gold Cyrillic letters. I froze. My heart did this little skip. To test myself, I covered part of the title with my hand and tried to sound out the remaining letters in my head. My inner voice went, Istoriya Sovet.